Good evening, everybody, and welcome to episode 45 of Radio Europa. We've got a slightly different format for you tonight. We're going to be looking at the European election results, and joining me to do that is Darth from Scotland. Hi, mate.
All right, mate, how you doing?
Yeah, good, thanks. How about you?
Aye, not bad, thanks.
Great. So, as you all know, there was elections taking place across the European Union from Thursday to Sunday last week. We've pretty much got all the results now, bar a few outliers, but that's kind of irrelevant. So, and there's a number of interesting points that we thought we'd take away from that in various countries. So, first of all, if we just dive straight into it, I guess as British people ourselves, the first thing we've got to talk about is the Brexit Party landslide. It's pretty spectacular, wasn't it?
Well, the fact that a party which was created about 6 weeks ago has now shot to the top of the group of parties, I would say that's pretty impressive. And the fact that this is the second time that the man leading the party has done this. First time in 2014 and now in 2019.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's a spectacular campaign by Farage and the Brexit Party, and love them or loathe them. I mean, people have got their criticisms, which are fair enough, but you know, they did a really good job. And like you said, he did it in 2014 with UKIP. And I mean, this time around, they actually got 5 more seats than UKIP got 5 years ago, and they got 30.5% of the vote, which is pretty much 11% more than the second best. So overall, I mean, yeah, they've done really well. Do you think that kind of indicates? I mean, I know people are saying that it doesn't, but do you think that indicates that actually in every part of every part of England and Wales, there's a majority still that want Brexit?
With the exception, obviously, of London, I would probably say yes. I mean, there's some people have obviously said that it's been a protest vote, and you know, people don't actually really want Brexit still, but at the same time, it's just like I said, a protest vote. But I think it's quite obvious that the two. I mean, as much as we don't technically have it. I mean, we kind of live under a two-party system, i.e. Labour or Conservative, and obviously both parties have made no steps forward in delivering Brexit. And I think the people of especially England and Wales are fed up with a lack of movement. I mean, I think, you know, you'll have some people who voted to leave would be quite happy as long as there was some kind of movement. You know, if they turned around and said, right, well, we're not leaving anymore, you'd probably find some people who voted leave would be happy simply because they now have some kind of resolution. But I think really the reason why the Brexit Party is shot to the surface is because, I mean, I said this the other day, it has Brexit in the name of the party. And as much as that sounds a wee bit silly, you know, if you're saying, well, it's the Brexit Party, we know exactly what their aim is, and obviously that is all that we're talking about in politics in Britain right now. So if a party which sole purpose is to get Brexit is going to the top, I would argue that sends a strong message.
Yeah, I mean, I agree definitely, and I mean, I saw a breakdown the other day that showed the if it was a first past the post constituency election like our general elections, then the Brexit Party would have had a majority, or would have had the highest number of votes in, I think, 433 out of 650 constituencies across the UK. So, you know, I guess that shows that if it was a national election and that pattern was repeated, then Brexit would win a landslide in Parliament.
Yeah, I know it's interesting to look at that. I mean, you've obviously got. We were talking about this before we came on air. The media have obviously been spinning this as best they can to make it seem like, well, it's not actually showing that people still want to leave. You know, they're trying to argue that if you tot up all the parties and put them against the Brexit Party and UKIP votes, you actually had more people voting for you know, parties that they would say are Remain parties. However, they conveniently put in the whole of the Conservative Party. And as far as I'm aware, there are at least some Labour MPs who who do want to leave the UK. However many that is, I'm not sure, but it was convenient how they just lumped every single party that doesn't have Brexit or UKIP in its name and put them all as Remain parties on the media.
Yeah, it was quite a snide trick actually, because although I do hope that a lot of people would have seen that and thought, I mean, because I know I did on the morning after the election, I was looking at the television in disbelief, thinking they're standing in front of a map that's showing Brexit Party has won everywhere, and they're saying, oh, but by the way, this means that British people want to remain in the European Union, because if you add this up and you leave out these lot and fiddle with these numbers, then you just about get this percentage. And it was quite, comical, really, how they were going about it.
And what Farage said, which I thought was quite funny, is he says, look, if you take the Conservative Party, he says, which the media has put in the Remain side, he says that the Conservative parties in general have wanted to leave Europe. So if you take them and put them in the leave part, he says you end up getting a breakdown of 52% to 48%, which is exactly what the numbers were for the actual independence referendum, not the independence referendum. I've got my Scottish hat on. The Brexit referendum. Leave voted 52 and Remain voted 48, and that's the same percentage breakdown that they got here.
Yeah, that's right, and of course, the media would do well to recognise that it was in the last general election, the Conservative manifesto was to honour the result of the referendum and leave the European Union. So they really should count it as a Leave party, because by the letter of the law, it is.
Yeah, and I mean, you're speaking to a man from Scotland, so I will concede the fact that the SNP did win the most number of seats, albeit it was 3 up from it was 3 up from 2, so they won 3 out of possible six seats in Scotland. So obviously that kind of reflects the fact that Scotland still is overall the majority of the people who vote at least want to remain in the EU, which I find strange in of itself, because everybody's who wants to remain seems to vote SNP, who then want to leave Britain. So they want to leave one group of countries to regain their independence, to then rejoin a much bigger group of countries and hand over their laws and money to that conglomerate of countries. So I find that weird, but I thought I might as well be honest and say, obviously Scotland has the number of people who voted, the majority of them want to remain in the European Union.
Yeah, and I mean, I guess just on that point, it is difficult to lump Scotland in with the rest of the UK when we're talking about election results, because the voting pattern is so different in the last sort of 10, 15 years. And it is clear there is a massive difference, where England and Wales, there is clearly, in my opinion, there's a clear majority for Brexit. In Scotland, there's an even clearer majority for Remain. So, I guess even I, as a unionist, would have to concede that that there's still question marks over, how that's going to end up.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's been kind of talks as to whether Sturgeon's going to call a second referendum. I think she's kind of reluctant to, because I don't think she knows whether she's going to win it if she does. And the SNP, I think, have made a mess in a lot of parts in the country. And obviously, after the oil market dropped out after the 2014 referendum, a lot of people were turning around and said, if we had left, we would be on our arse right now. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. But overall, I think at least the majority of the people in Scotland would like to remain in the EU. But we won't find out until if and when we get Indy 2.0.
Yeah, and no doubt, when the time comes, I mean, that'll make for some good good live stream episodes. Have some good chats about that. So just kind of looking across the channel now, obviously France, Macron's been under a lot of pressure. Le Pen didn't do quite as well as I'd expected her. Expected her to do. What did you think of her showing?
Yeah, I mean the press is kind of saying, she narrowly wins, and let's be honest, Le Pen isn't gonna get the top job in France. So I think there's very much a kind of reluctant admittance that her party is doing well, but they're kind of saying, she's doing well, but don't assume anything else. I think there's very much a reluctance to admit in France that there is a movement to the right, and I think France is slowly waking up. And I think at least part of that is because of the mass migration into France and the issues that you can clearly see in Paris and places like that, and obviously the last 25 weeks of protests in Paris regarding Macron's policies.
Yeah, but this is what I couldn't understand about the election in France, because Macron is clearly not a very popular guy. His approval ratings were last year, they ended up quite a bit lower than the result that his party got, which is 22.4% in the EU election. So I was surprised, not necessarily that Le Pen didn't do better, but that Macron did as well as he did.
I mean, I think you're going to get some people who are just going to want to vote to keep the status quo because they don't want to see change. And I suppose some people will think, well, if we're voting in people who support Le Pen, we're going to get kind of massive amounts of change. And I think it's one of these things. There are people who just don't like change. So if they know what they have right now, they know what they have. It might be bad, but some people will be reluctant to vote for change because they don't know what that change is going to entail. And I think obviously, that's why some people didn't want to leave in Britain, didn't want to leave the EU, because they think, well, we know what the status quo is, so we're happy with the status quo, even if it's not great. We don't know what the status quo would be once we leave, so we'd rather not leave. And I think that's kind of the same thing. And I think France does a better job of fear mongering when it comes to the right wing. Maybe that's just because they're geographically closer to other kind of right leaning countries. I'm not sure, but yeah, there certainly seems to be less kind of willingness for France to move to the right than say the UK is right now.
Yeah, and I think with Marine Le Pen, the Le Pen family generally, I think they have an extra barrier to climb when it comes to people's reluctance to change, because I guess I think that her party, what do they call themselves now? Rassemblement National or something like that, National Rally. Yeah. I mean, they're going to struggle as long as Le Pen or somebody from the Le Pen family is leading the party. I think they're going to struggle, to be honest.
Yeah, and I mean, I think it's very going to depend on kind of the direction of the EU, or sorry, the European Parliament, and what's going to happen in the next couple of months in France. I mean, if France continues a downward spiral into kind of civil war between factions of people, growing tensions with migrants, and kind of no finish in sight, then people may eventually decide, no, enough's enough. We need to do something about this. But I think obviously the main thing is there'll probably a big change in direction in the European Parliament when you've got so many people who have been voted into seats who are definitely right leaning.
Yeah, definitely. So it'll be interesting to see how that goes. I mean, obviously we've spoken a lot about France in these live streams with the yellow vest and everything. So it'd be a good one to watch, because, like you said just now, that if a situation deteriorates, then that kind of influences Le Pen's support. So yeah, that's another very interesting one.
before we jump further into Europe, should we maybe mention the fact that our dear Maybot decided to pack it in the other day?
Oh yeah, I totally overlooked that.
It seemed to, for some reason, I don't know whether it's just we've had a couple of leadership changes since, obviously this is the second leadership change now since Brexit. It's maybe a bit of an anticlimactical thing, and there was so much anticipation of her leaving, but it kind of escaped me until we were discussing topics, and I thought, oh yeah, we've had a Prime Minister announce her resignation a few days ago.
Yeah, I mean that was an interesting one again, because, like you said, it did kind of get swept under the carpet a little bit with the elections and the seismic result there. But I mean, it was a big thing in itself, because Theresa May has been like the proverbial apocalyptic cockroach. She's you know, whatever they throw at her, she just would not move. But she's finally succumbed to the pressure. I think when they got they must have got some private exit polls after Thursday, and I know they'd arranged at the conference beforehand, but I mean that was probably the predictions of the election result was probably the last straw, wasn't it?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think there was that as well as her deal, if you can call it a deal, that she had negotiated with the European Parliament. It was rejected by MPs 3 times, and obviously they didn't manage to find a compromise with the Labour Party. So she's kind of like been told, your deal is absolute pants, and you clearly aren't looking for anything better, and you clearly can't get anything better. So I think she was caught between a rock and a hard place. And like, and credit to her, she didn't step down before, and she did kind of hold strong. But when you're in the situation where you can't make any headway, what else can you do when you say, I have been elected to deliver Brexit, and has said multiple times, I will deliver Brexit, and Brexit is no closer?
Yeah, I mean, it got to the point that it was kind of like immovable object and unstoppable force. Nothing would give. She doesn't have a majority in Parliament. There's no way of getting the deal through. She was about to crash the Conservative Party into a brick wall. So, yeah, I mean, she couldn't, with the best will in the world, she couldn't have continued, I don't think.
Can I just ask, and I know obviously we've kind of come back to this topic, and I'll keep it short, but do you think there is anybody who can, in the Conservative Party or out with, who can kind of regain control of the horse that has now bolted? And do you think we will leave the EU ultimately?
Yeah, I mean, it's quite a broad one. I have given it quite a lot of thought over the recent days, and I'll just, as briefly as I can. I think, I think what any new leader of the Conservative Party has got to be a Brexiteer. They've got to have an election and win a majority and ensure that all of their candidates stand on a pledge to not frustrate the process. I think if they don't do those things, then Brexit becomes very unlikely. But if they do those things, then Brexit will be no problem. That's my take on it.
Yeah, and obviously the favourite right now is Boris Johnson, and everybody doesn't want Boris to come in. So I don't know if the fact that the establishment are scared of him coming in would suggest then that he actually would get something put in place which would allow us to leave Europe with more of our dignity intact than we do right now. You kind of always got to assume these days that whatever the media are saying is bad, assume the opposite.
Yeah, and I think with Boris as well, they know that his popularity makes him pretty capable of winning that majority that they need in Parliament to get it done. The other candidate who, to be honest, I would probably say would be my preference, even though I'm not a Tory, I don't have a dog in the fight, is Esther McVey, because she's the only one thus far who has said we're not, that we can't compromise, that it has to be all or nothing, therefore it has to be Leave because Leave won the referendum. So whereas all the others are making these platitudes about, oh, you know, it has to be acceptable to the 48, etc., etc. And Estimate Vey is the only one who said, no, you have to go with the majority. So, and I respect that. So I think that she would be my favourite at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, this is, you know, regardless of your view of it, I think if you're a true believer in the democratic vote, you've got to go on what the majority say. And you know, I can understand if I didn't want us to leave the EU, you know, I would obviously be upset. But I think if you genuinely believe that your vote is worth something, then you would say, right, well, I didn't get what I want, but there are more people who voted to leave than to remain, so I've got to respect that. And I'm becoming worried that every time we have a vote now, there's good in regard to anything, you know, here or in Europe or obviously in America. It's, oh well, you didn't really win. You didn't actually get, you know, if you look at this and this, and there was idea of corruption, and you know, people are saying that the Brexit vote was illegal, and like we've spoken about, well, if you look at the breakdown, there isn't actually that many people wanting to leave, and there's always this attempt to kind of delegitimize the vote. And you're thinking, well, if you're trying to delegitimize the vote, what's the point in having an election if this is what you're going to do every time there is a vote?
Yeah, I think that's a big problem. I mean, it's a very interesting point in the democratic process, because I suppose what we're getting is a situation whereby, and you saw this with Trump in America, it's like, well, all of a sudden when the results they start to go against the established power base, you kind of find out that a lot of them are not really Democrats.
Well, yeah, it was, well, Trump didn't win the popular vote. He only won because of the Electoral College. Therefore, he didn't actually win the election. And you're like, well, you know, there is a reason why the Electoral College is there, and that's so that California, New York, and Texas and Florida don't decide the result of an election every time they have one. But like you're saying, when people don't get their own way, all of a sudden they're not very democratic. Now, I'm not really sure, but you may know more than me, but it seems to be that the rest of Europe is a bit more kind of respectful of the results of their elections, but I might be wrong on that.
I guess it depends where you go, doesn't it? I mean, I know that there is a very noisy minority of socialists in Germany who, you know, they don't think AfD should even be allowed to exist, for instance. And I think, you know, in Spain, the mainstream media just won't legitimize Vox as a party. They won't have them on the television or anything like that. So, but then you've got other countries, which I think we're going to come on to in a minute, actually, like Italy, where if you look, only one leftist party got any votes in the last election. It was all right wingers, and that's kind of normal there. So I think it really does depend on where you go.
You might want to repeat that last sentence, because I think you had a big cut off there for 2 or 3 seconds.
Sorry, say again.
You cut off for a good 3 or 4 seconds there, so I don't know if you want to repeat that last point for the listeners.
Oh, right, I didn't realize I had probably a bit of a dodgy connection. But yeah, I don't know how much you guys heard, but basically my point was that depending on where you go in Europe, you know, in Italy, obviously the right is much more acceptable, whereas in Spain and Germany, the media and the political class just won't legitimize certain parties. So just double check, is the sound coming through all right at the moment?
It's coming through fine right now. There was just a little blip there, but hopefully we don't have a crash of like what we had a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah, boomer tech and all that.
Shall we move on to Italy then?
Yeah, I think that kind of leads us nicely onto Italy, because you know, I was thinking, because Italy, if you look at the election results there, I mean, obviously, well, the main story is Salvini won big, but overall, the broader picture in Italy is kind of reassuring for right wingers because, you know, the parties, there was only one party that is an establishment party that got any votes, and that was the Socialist Party. The other parties, Five Star, okay, you know, they're a bit of left, bit of right, but then you've got Brothers of Italy, Forza Italia. I don't know what their English translation is, but you have a group of parties on the right who are pretty strong over there.
Yeah, and I'm not heavily clued up on the Italian politics, but I mean, Salvini clearly is somebody who the Italian people really respect, and I think obviously the fact that he has openly kind of come out strongly against mass migration into Italy, I think has won him a lot of respect with his people.
Yeah, definitely, and it just goes to show in the increase in his vote. I mean, it's very rare that you see a party of government actually increase their vote shares so dramatically as well. You know, Salvini is of course the interior minister over there, and yeah, 28.1% swing to Lega. They won 34.3% of the vote, 9 million votes. 29 seats up from 24. So, yeah, I mean, it really is incredible, but it just goes to show, and I think Hungary is the same, but it just goes to show what happens. You know, politicians, they want a recipe for success. Well, do what the people want. And there you go. You've got your recipe.
And I think this is another thing which is causing this movement, because it's not just in Europe right now. I mean, Australia, like we spoke about last week, had a shock election whereby it was a right wing person got voted in. Trump obviously got voted in, and this is not a unique thing where there is, I suppose you could say, anti-establishment vote. And from what I can see, it's obviously a lot. Some of the people in the European Parliament are unelected by the people, and I think when these people are making decisions which people clearly don't want but continue to do it anyway, you're going to eventually have people say, "Well, no, hold on a minute. You're continuing to do things which we clearly don't want you to do because you think it's the best for us, or you have your own kind of nefarious reasons for doing what you're doing. We're not going to put up with this, and we're gonna vote with our feet." And people then seem surprised when people turn around and say, "We know we've had enough of your lies and your deception. We're going to put you out." And I find it fascinating how again and again and again people don't seem to get the fact that if you annoy people and piss people off for long enough, they're eventually going to turn around and put two fingers up to you.
Yeah, and I mean, in Italy, the populace has a really good contrast over there because over the last sort of 15 years, they had a number of, I think they like to call them technocratic governments. Basically, they had a lot of governments that were just installed by the EU to deal with financial issues because there was an impasse in the parliament. But since, there's been this coalition, which is kind of uneasy between Five Star and Lega, but Salvini has really, really stepped up, and he is the foremost politician in Italy. He has kept his word. He's clearly loved by Italian people, and they see him as doing what they elected him to do. But then if they contrast that with these commissioners in the European Union who, well, nobody even knows their names, actually for normal people, it's such an easy decision to make. There's no contest.
Yeah, and I think I'm just kind of been reading through an article here earlier on. Salvini had said, he said, which came in third in the 2018 election. This was Following his victory, Mr. Salvini said in Milan, "A new Europe is born. I'm proud that the League is participating in this new European renaissance." He said previously, "As far as I'm concerned, if the League wins, nothing changes in Italy. Everything will change in Europe starting tomorrow." So right from the start, he has been very much for changing Europe and making changes in Europe and in Italy itself. Whereas, I don't think you really have that kind of drive in say Britain. It's just kind of the EU is there, and we just kind of go along with it regardless of what happens. And from what I can see, there's very much a pushback in Italy where Salvini is clearly not happy with the status quo in Europe, and he said, "I'm going to do something about it," and he's quite clearly being rewarded for it. Whereas I don't. Up till Brexit happened, I really knew nothing about what went on in Europe, and to a certain extent, I still don't really know a whole lot about what the policies are that the British MEPs are pushing for up till now, because I don't think we really cared about it, except the fact that people want out, and that's all that really seems to matter to the British people, if that makes sense.
Yeah, but I think because there is a different kind of culture, isn't it? Because you're quite, like you said, I think most people are in that position in this country where most people still don't really know what goes on in the European Parliament and the Commission and whatever, or at least they don't know what people stand for. It's that place over the channel where there's people we don't know and they sit around eating croissants and speaking French to one another or something. Whereas I think for Italy, the Italian culture is such that they feel more of Europe. They feel more involved in the continent's affairs generally. Obviously, geographically, they are. So, and they were one of the original founding members. So I think it's more ingrained in their political culture to care about what goes on. Which I think then translates when things go wrong into that drive to change it rather than to just leave it like we're doing. So,
do you think if tomorrow or whenever these new MEPs move into place, do you think if there is any realistic way to reverse some of the damage that has been done by the current European Parliament? Because you can see the movement of, we want open borders, we want to move in. We spoke a couple of weeks ago about, I think it was Guy Verhofstadt was wanting some kind of European African Union. There's all these moves for obviously a globalization and Europe leading the way in that. And do you think there is any kind of potential for a reversal of that at all, with obviously the results that we've had across Europe?
I don't know, because I'm skeptical of the influence that even if the Liberals and the Europhiles lost 90% of their seats, I'm skeptical as to how much change can be made without the approval of Macron, Merkel, Michel Barnier, and Guy Verhofstadt. Because I do stand by I know it's a commonly repeated trope in the UK, but I do stand by the fact that it is a profoundly undemocratic organisation, and I don't think they will let elections disrupt the integrity, as they see it, of the project.
Yeah, you can't go and let the democracy get in the way of a well thought out nefarious plan, I suppose.
Well, yeah, I mean, exactly, but I guess that kind of leads us nicely on to. I know we'll talk about Hungary afterwards, but it leads us nicely on to the breakdown of what's going on, in the wider groups, the continental groups that they have in the European Parliament. Because obviously there's, for those that don't know, maybe Americans listening or whatever, but they don't sit just with their political parties. They sit with a group which is transnational, and I think there's seven main groups, or 8.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. there's 6. So you've got the EPP, which is the European People's Party group, the S&D, which is the Progressive Alliance of Socialists and Democrats. ALDE is the Alliance of Liberals and Democrats for Europe. The ENF, Europe of Nations and Freedom. The ECR is the European Conservatives and Reformists group. And the EFDD, the Europe of Freedom and Direct Democracy. And ironically enough, I only learned about this tonight, so this was a new learning experience for me as well.
Yeah, there's also a couple of other smaller groups as well, which is the Greens and the European Free Alliance, and then the other one is, I mean, and they're just Greenpeace types, and then the other kind of marginal one, which is I think the smallest now, is European United Left, Nordic Green Left, and they're basically communists, and nobody really cares about them. So it's not even worth counting in the groups. But so yeah, I mean, there's 6 or 7 main groups. I mean, what we can see from just the numbers in this election is that, I mean, and they're not massive drops, 30 odd seats, but so the European People's Party, the Merkels of this world, and the Socialists, the Progressive Alliance, have each lost 39 and 34 seats, respectively. And surprisingly, the Liberals gained quite a number of those. But the main gains have come for Europe of Nations and Freedom and EFDD. So, yeah, I mean, the general trend is an increase in, I mean, it's a very it's a modest increase, but it is an increase nonetheless in the amount of seats for the nationalist and broadly Eurosceptic groupings.
Yeah, and like I said, this is something which I've really only kind of learned about tonight when doing research on this. So I don't have a whole lot to make comment on regarding it, but it will be interesting to see if there's, and this is where the skepticism comes in with me, is it's all fine and great that these parties who are Eurosceptic are being voted in greater numbers, but the skeptic in me says, will anything change out of this? Will there be any noticeable change in the policies being voted in? Will there be any kind of movement to try and rein in the runaway of what I see as the slow destruction of Europe through kind of bad policies and enormous amounts of migration into what seems to be a very leaky border of Europe?
Yeah, I mean, I think, like we commented before, I don't think anything is going to change with these results because, I mean, it always struck me that this Parliament is designed so that, because the Parliament and the Commission can propose legislation, but the Parliament's designed as such that they can never quite get enough seats to get something passed of their own accord. Because the groups won't agree on legislation to propose. But there are enough establishment politicians in there that when the Commission propose legislation, it gets rubber stamped quite easily because all of a sudden the EPP will vote alongside the Socialists and Democrats because it wasn't a partisan piece of legislation. It was proposed by Jean-Claude Juncker or somebody else at the top of in the Commission or the Council. So I do believe that the cynic in me says that is a purposeful design in order that only the Commission, the unelected Commission, will ever make legislation that can pass.
Yeah, and I feel myself starting to get some kind of nervous tick every time I hear Jean-Claude Juncker's name or Guy Verhofstadt. Just they become these kind of hated people. If you're a bit of a Eurosceptic, every time you hear them or see them, you just think, I really don't like you, and it's so frustrating. You'd love, ironically enough, I'd love to sit down and speak with these guys and kind of hear their logical arguments for why they do what they do. I've heard Verhofstadt make the speeches of, we need to get these countries to sign over more of their sovereignty to us because we know best. We know what's best for them, and that's a terrifying prospect. I think of, it's this kind of desire of kind of almost imperialism, of wanting to have this massive amount of people under your control, a massive empire which you can then take on other parts of the world with. And I just find it a very unsettling prospect.
Yeah, I mean, it is rather sinister, I suppose, and all the more so because nobody really knows who the commissioners are. But you're right, we have got these kind of pantomime villains with Juncker and Barnier and Verhofstadt in particular, with his floppy bowl cut and his awful teeth. He is very much a pantomime villain. It's quite an amusing character, really, if it wasn't so involved.
Yeah, he is a bit of a meme of a character. If it wasn't so, like you're saying, if he wasn't such a kind of nefarious guy, he would be funny. But unfortunately, he has a good amount of power behind him. So I think, I mean, it was interesting, talking about kind of breakdowns of things. I think this kind of the obvious place where the breakdowns of groups of people is most obvious in Germany, obviously, because Germany seems to always have a kind of coalition of parties working together for its national parliament, and that may be about to break down because of the results of Germany's EU election results.
Yeah, because with this, Merkel's party, the CDU, still did come out with the most seats, but they lost. They did lose quite a large number of votes. That benefited the Greens, but then the coalition partners, the SPD, the Social Democratic Party, they also lost 11% of their vote. Well, there's an 11% swing away from them. Just to be honest, it does look like the Greens benefited from this. So, but in Germany, again, you've got, I mean, it's kind of unexpected, and this is something we noted down before that to speak about, which is that AfD didn't do quite as well as one might have thought. They won 11 seats, and remember, Germany has 96. They only won 11.
Just under 11% of the share of the vote.
Yeah, and and they, outside of kind of the old GDR territory, and even then they didn't win the whole of that, but outside the old GDR territory, AfD were nowhere to be seen, really.
So why do you think that the Greens did so well here? I have a sneaking suspicion, but I want to know what your thoughts are.
Honestly, I think it's simply a matter of there's been a CDU SPD coalition in Germany for as long as anybody can remember, and they want a protest vote, but they're a bit too cucked to vote for AfD, so they pick the Green Party. That's just my opinion.
Do you think it has anything to do with the I suppose the resurfacing of the climate change hysteria? I mean, and for the record, I am not a climate change denier. I think that we go about kind of looking after the planet in the wrong way. I think the ideas that are being proposed of massive taxation to do very little, I think that that there's not a lot of good that comes from this. But I think there's some kind of re-rise of the Green Party, of climate change scaring has caused the Greens to resurface.
Oh yeah, I mean, I would say that's probably a factor, especially in the UK as well, because of all this Extinction Rebellion stuff, and I guess that's been going on around the world. But I think Anne Widdecombe made an interesting point on television on Sunday night, and I think this applies to Germany as well, is that there are people often take a vote for the Green Party in any country to mean a pro-European vote, but there are a number of reasons why people vote for the Green Party, and of course the most obvious one is the recent climate hysteria. And
yeah,
I would suppose that a lot of the voters, I don't know if you'd say majority, but a lot of the Green voters, particularly in Germany, but also in the UK, are young people who don't really think about politics, but they do think about climate change. So that it's not about Brexit or about, in Germany, it's not about whether they're pro or anti the project. It's literally just about climate change.
And what I find really interesting is they've gone down this Germany's gone down this route of becoming a very clean nation, but from what I understand, there is growing issues with their energy solutions, and I think they're having to rely more and more on Russian oil to make sure that they're not going under in regards to their energy consumption in Germany.
Yeah, I mean, this was an issue at the last election there, I think, because the Free Democrats, who are kind of like, I suppose you'd say classical liberals, slightly to the right of Merkel, but they one of their big campaign things was about getting rid of the carbon taxes. Because I think, I mean, maybe a German viewer can correct me if I'm wrong on this, but I think that one of the reasons why they're probably relying a lot more on foreign imports of energy resources than they used to is because of their push to go green. And I'm like you, I'm an environmentalist, so I'm not one of these, petrol loving Americans or anything. But I do think that they maybe were a bit eager and they haven't struck the balance right, and that can prompt various things in people's voting patterns. So yeah.
I don't think really, and I don't really want to go down this road, this discussion topic tonight, but I don't think there's really been a feasible alternative for your kind of fossil fuels. Obviously, you've got various things. I mean, Scotland's really bought into wind power, but I don't really think there's been a solution that's been come up with that is, I suppose, environmentally acceptable on all fronts, but can produce as much energy as fossil fuel does.
Yeah, I mean, we could do a whole episode on this one time, but I think the only thing I'd say on that is that when you make the shift from fossil fuels to renewables, you kind of have to do it gradually. And I think because of pressure from protesters and green parties and whatnot, there's kind of a pressure on governments to make too many changes at once, and then you end up with either an output shortage or you end up losing business abroad or whatever. So yeah, I mean, there's definitely a problem with planning when it comes to green issues.
And ultimately, money talks. So if there's more money being put into fossil fuels, that's where most of the decisions are going to get made. And until that changes, then I don't think there's going to be any kind of progress. But shall we move on to the big man of Eastern Europe?
Yeah, I mean, last but definitely not least is Viktor Orban. He's done it again. He's shown Western politicians exactly how one maintains their popularity, because his party, Fidesz, I think that's, we weren't sure how to pronounce it before, but I think that's it. They've dominated Hungarian politics for probably a decade or so.
And they increased their percentage. Not just they did well, but they increased their amount of votes that they got from 2014.
Yeah, precisely. So they actually got 51.5%. Sorry, no, they got 52.5% of the vote. They got a seat more than last time. They did get a slight percentage swing towards them. Yeah, I mean, what can you say? They know how to win, and their strategy is simply do what you say you're going to do and do what the majority of the people want you to do.
Yeah, and I mean, there's obviously something about kind of Eastern Europe. Maybe it's just the fact that they're much closer to kind of communism, and obviously the Berlin Wall only falling in kind of the early 1990s. So I suppose socialism and communism is still very much fresh in their mind. But the left-wing Democratic Coalition only got 16.3%, and that was the second place vote. And then you've got the small Liberal Momentum Party round about the 10% mark. So it's clearly obvious that Hungary and other Eastern European countries are not interested in going back to socialism because they know how bad it was.
Yeah, and I think in the culture of places like Hungary, because they know after being part of the Ottoman Empire for a while back in the medieval period, or sort of post-medieval period, whatever you want to call it, and then obviously having a foreign elite ruling them as communists throughout the 20th century, they're no stranger to hostile ideologies and hostile people. So, yeah, I mean, they really do support Orban, and when he promises to protect them from the financial pressures of the EU, but also from the migratory pressures coming from outside the EU, that really strikes a chord. And yeah, you can see why he does well.
And I think this is reflective in the amount of votes that were cast in Hungary. So I think they were around 41, just under 42% of the vote. Now, I think overall Europe, the amount of votes was around 50% of the possible votes. But Britain was under 40%, and I think other countries were similar. But the first EU elections for Hungary, they were 38.5%, and that was in 2004. And they've gone up to just under 42%. So people obviously care what's happening to them in Europe, in Hungary, more so than in other countries like ourselves.
Yeah, definitely, and I think that a lot of that stems from the fact that Hungary have had a bit of a run-in, well, an ongoing run-in with the European Union over the last 2 or 3 years, probably even longer. So,
and on that, I think obviously the party was suspended from the EPP earlier this year because the Hungarian government's anti-Brussels poster campaigns, and Viktor Orban has not ruled out walking out of the group if the group doesn't draw closer to Salvini's group. So it'll be interesting to see what happens then if obviously you've got a large amount of right-leaning MEPs being voted in, and if there's still a reluctance to move right in politics, whether there's going to be a massive chasm opens up in the European Parliament.
Yeah, that would be interesting to keep an eye on. I mean, I get the impression, I know from the news reports that the preferred option of Orban's party is to stay in the EPP. I think they operate under the notion of keeping one's enemies close, and also the possibility of effecting change from within. But yeah, I mean, it would be a welcome addition to the European Nations and Freedom or whatever if they were to be expelled from the EPP. Then that's another dozen or so MEPs for Salvini's group. So yeah, that'd be an interesting one to watch, I think.
Yeah, and I suppose obviously we'll kind of wrap this up. So it'll certainly be interesting to see what happens in the coming weeks and months to see, like I said, whether there's going to be any change in the movement of the European Parliament, or whether it's just going to be back to normal and will continue infringing on people's rights and taking away our ability to communicate online, and so that we're unable to really take back control of our sovereign nations.
Yeah, I mean that's effectively what it's going to come down to, and I think overall we can say that it's been a good result, but it hasn't been a resounding victory for populist parties. It's been a good showing, but there's a long way to go. So yeah, like you said, I think that brings us to a point where we can wrap up quite nicely. Just before we do, just want to say thanks to everybody that's been donating and helping us out, like and subscribe and everything. It's really helpful. We're very grateful for you doing so. If anybody would like to donate, then the links are in the description below, and please remember to hit like and subscribe and share the video wherever you can. I guess all that's left to say is thanks for listening, everybody, and Darth, it's been a pleasure. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks, mate. Good to chat to you.
Great, nice one. Cheers. Bye, everybody.
See you later, guys.